Welcome to the Center for Climate and Security's Climate and Security podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Shetha Chakraborty. Regular viewers will know that twice a month, we bring you exclusive dialogues with the world's leading thinkers, educators, civil servants, and military personnel working at the nexus of climate and security. I ask experts to share with us their views and perspectives of how we can best prepare in this time of high consequence risk, particularly climate change. Today's podcast guest is Joan VanDervort. She is a distinguished member of the Center for Climate and Security's Advisory Board and has over 28 years of professional experience working with the Department of Defense across a broad spectrum of issues, from climate change and energy security to the various forces impacting military training capabilities. Before retiring from federal service in 2014, she served as the Deputy Director for Ranges, Sea, and Airspace in the Office of the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, where she oversaw not just military training constraints, but really what that means for our national security. Joan has worked with the US Army and NATO prior to that, so we will have a lot to discuss. Joan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, and I'm so happy to be here to discuss these issues with you today.
Excellent, thank you. So let's begin. Let's talk a little bit about what you think the biggest issues in climate and security really are that we need to be concerned about.
Well, one of the things that really comes across to me as so important, and I must admit keeps me up at night, is the impact of climate factors on training. Because if you are looking at readiness, you have to look at live training and the importance of live training. So the community as a whole has really taken a really good look at sea level rise. What they haven't been doing, or what has gone under the radar screen, is the impact of other climate factors like inland flooding, wildfires, snowmelt, and permafrost decrease in Alaska, and how that is impacting training.
Excellent. And in addition to that, so you've got all of these obvious impacts and the impacts on training. Are there some additional chain effects that are also impacting training and readiness?
There certainly are. For the last 15 years, I have been in an area which has focused on the challenges that the services have had with encroachment. And if a lot of people don't deal with encroachment, we are basically looking at the impacts of like environmental regulations on training, how they restrict training, but also with regard to some of the other things like our communities, which may be in proximity to our installations, and how we can partner with them. When you put the climate factors together with restrictions that we are already challenged with, it exacerbates the situation. And that's what we are facing right now.
And so you've had such a long career dealing with these issues head on. Can you give us some examples to illustrate what this looks like in real time, something that you've worked on?
Let me give you some examples of the impacts of certain climate factors that the services are facing right now, or at least in the last 5 years. There have been a number of cases both in the East Coast, the West Coast, in Hawaii, as well as in Alaska, where we've seen climate factors such as intense rainfalls, such as in Fort Benning and Fort Jackson. At Fort Jackson, just several years ago, they saw 15 inches of rain in a 24-hour period. Damages of up to $4.8 million. 8 ranges out of their 31, and this is a major basic training installation, were down. Roads were down. Access into training areas were down. So you had sustained impacts on training down there. At Fort Benning, which is the home of the Armor School, as well as Infantry School, they had, during the same period of, say, 6 months over up through November, December of 2015, over 16, 2 back-to-back rainfall events. Those particular rainfall events were very severe, $14.8 million in damages there. Then you take a look out west. We look at Fallon Naval Air Station, the impacts of wildfire out there just in the last several years, along with a significant amount of snow melt in the Sierra Nevada that left their runways devastated and impacts to their instrumentation, $50 million worth of damage from a monsoon that took place right after 3 years of drought, really devastating the ranges there. In Alaska, we're dealing with snow melt and wildfire and permafrost, and Alaska drought. So we really have a lot that we're dealing with. So we don't have to really wait for climate change to really make an impact. It's impacting us right now.
Yes, and the 2018 wildfire season that's kicked off has also had an impact on training. Can you talk a little bit about what specifically wildfires mean for training?
It can, and you can look at it from two perspectives. The one perspective is if you have a risk of wildfire, it's going to impact your training, and why is that? Because you can easily start a wildfire from the ignition when you're firing weapons. So you may have a restriction when you're at risk for wildfire, when you have those red flag days. And of course, we're experiencing more of those in the last several years. You also have problems when you have the wildfire and it's impacting and it has touched the installation and has touched the ranges. Alaska, out in Southwest, at Camp Pendleton, 29 Palms, we're seeing that happening. The black flag days are those particular days where the heat index is going up, okay? And so we are, or the department puts into place advisory and guidance that says above a certain humidity and temperature, you don't want to train for certain tasks, okay? They have a lot of heat injuries, both heat exhaustion and heat stroke. In fact, in 2017, they saw more hospitalization with regard to heat stroke than in prior years before, since back to 13.
And then red flag days, can you describe what that is?
Yes, those red flag days are red flag days which you are seeing higher temperatures and the risk of wildfire.
Okay, so that's more specific to wildfires. Thank you for clarifying that. I feel viewers would potentially want to know what that was, what the distinction was. So between these extreme conditions, whether it's a red flag or black flag situation, how is the military, how has it handled these impacts in the past? How has it prepared for these types of conditions that the troops are facing? Because it's not that it's been completely unanticipated.
Right. Well, the services have always taken a look at weather and what conditions they're going to face in a hostile environment and, when they go into combat. So there's a lot of research done with regard to both weapon systems. Can the weapon systems fire as well in very cold environments or very hot environments? They look at the health of the military personnel going into combat. They track diseases. Those are the types of things that they are doing and have done throughout many, many years.
And so what does that mean in terms of the well-being, health and well-being of the troops that are not just training? So we're talking about concerns related to training and readiness, but also what are the health impacts that troops are already potentially facing that are out in trying to complete the missions and experiencing and resulting in impacting them adversely because they potentially might not be able to fulfill the missions?
When you look at some of the information that the Defense Health Agency is putting out. They are tracking diseases, and we know, and the prevalence of diseases. They, of course, support the combatant commanders. And of course, I think what we're seeing now, because of climate change and the higher temperatures, that you'll see tropical diseases moving and migrating to subtropical areas. So even the migration of diseases, following and tracking them, is something that the department does, and especially concerns the health of the military personnel going into combat, as well as things like heat. How long can they withstand heat? Under what conditions? Is it during basic training, or is it actually more seasoned soldiers or sailors in a combat situation? Are they in tactical vehicles, you know, where they're going to, or in confined spaces? So those are things that we're looking at.
So in your tenure, in the roles that you've, in the very admirable positions that you've been placed in, overseeing the amount of funding that is being allocated, and the majority of funding, and correct me if I'm wrong there, that is allocated in the military is for training and readiness. And so if that's something that we're not able to fulfill, how do you begin to correct for that?
It's a complicated answer to that, but in order to, let's say, get more money for your training, and particularly for battling climate change factors and for planning for those, you need to set the policy first so that you can have a requirement. What is the requirement for doing that? And so the policy piece is so very important, because you cannot get the money to place it against this type of planning unless you have the requirement. And so that starts with policy.
Okay, so we need directives from the top down, really.
Yeah, it really starts at the very top with policy guidance issued by the Office of the Secretary of Defense.
What would the public, what would viewers listening to us having this conversation now, what would they be surprised to learn from the time that you've spent in your roles?
I think what they would be surprised to learn is how closely linked and connected the natural resource base is connected with training, particular for ground maneuver training, whether it's light maneuver, heavy maneuver. In terms of our live training, we depend upon the health of those natural resources, the carrying capacity of the soil and the land to support that training. Because when we go out, and I'm speaking from an Army perspective or a Marine Corps perspective, you do a lot of damage within a certain area if you are constantly training there and you have heavy tactical vehicles. It's inherently destructive, and so it requires maintenance and rehabilitation of the land. So unless you can get out there and you can rehabilitate the land, and it makes it harder if you have erosion and more erosion from flooding, or you have the flooding that intensifies because you've had years and years of drought. Your vegetation is dry, your soil is dry, so when the rains come, they can cause a massive amount of erosion. So it's that real link between the carrying capacity of the land to support the training and what we're doing there, and the time and the dollars to be able to go in and keep the resiliency up of the land.
So you're really making a strong case for how important it is for our national security to have a relationship with the environments that we are required to work in and engage with.
Absolutely.
And so what would your appeal be to viewers? What would you say that really is necessary to be known in regards to supporting ultimately our collective national security? From everything that you've provided, it sounds like, and you're so passionate in expressing how important that is, but how do we get that same passion from those listening in to really recognize that that linked to our collective national security is so key to completing these missions?
It's readiness. Let's look at readiness. Our military has to be ready. We have to be prepared on a global, when you're looking at the world globally, we have to be prepared to deploy and to face enemies and adversaries in all different environments. The cornerstone of readiness is training. And you know, if you look at that readiness and you look at training, anything that compromises training can have an impact on our readiness. That's how you make the link to national security. And that's what I'm really passionate about, because I have been dealing with constraints upon training, and I know how that impacts, you know, our soldiers, our sailors, our Marines' ability, our airmen to go out and really to be able to win those battles.
What about those who would say, why don't we just amp up our science and technology solutions to this challenge? Why don't we come up with better suits and outerwear to deal with these more extreme conditions and temperatures? Why don't we just put a lot more funding into the weapons that our troops are using so that they can kind of fly above some of these atmospheric conditions that they would otherwise be troubled with? Are these reliable or reasonable solutions?
I think they're, in part, they are. You need the science. I know that the military is working on certain suits with cooling, but it can only go so far. You need to do that strategic planning in order to have the resiliency of both installations and training ground.
So in the beginning of this conversation, you gave some examples of different impacts that were affecting the troops. I'm curious if there's, in addition to flooding, wildfires, are there some additional impacts or ripple effects of these impacts that really you wouldn't expect? You would just say, okay, that's a little far-fetched there to be making that sort of connection between the two. But as somebody who's kind of seen it all in terms of what's been preventing really us meeting our best potential in readiness and preparedness as a national security issue. So,
well, let me just give you an example. Fort Benning is a really good example with the Armor School moving down to Fort Benning. You now house the Infantry School and the Armor School. The Armor School has been, since they moved down there, they have a shortage of land for maneuver training. With the amount of soil erosion and massive gulling that has taken place with these greater intensity of storms and the damage that has been done, they are not totally training to standard right now. So that's the type of example that we are looking at and how it really impacts training, and what viewers should be aware of. It makes things harder. You need to put more money into it. You need to plan more. And you need to make the hard decisions. Hard decisions about, where that training is going to take place in the future. Because as the department, we are always having to face new adversaries, a new kind of operational environment that we have to be prepared for. Therefore, we have to have the adaptability in terms of our ranges and training lands.
Right. And so obviously traditional threats, but also in a very rapidly changing environment. How do we prepare for that? That takes a lot of creativity and thoughtful planning. And so it's a dual potential impact on training and readiness. Is it prioritized, would you say? Is it?
I would say that I haven't looked at the funding right now for the training, but it is a central piece.
Okay. So it is central to our military's ethos for training and readiness and preparedness for existing threats and threats that we can foresee.
Yes,
and so,
absolutely. And some of them that we can't foresee into the future.
And there's a responsibility we have to prepare knowing what we know now, which we didn't necessarily have all the information, but there is a responsibility to act based on the information that is available to us. And so given all the information that you've shared, what is it that it could potentially seem to viewers that this is, something out of their scope, it obviously is very important. There's obviously a huge priority, a central priority in our forces for training and readiness. But how does the average American listening to this, feeling potentially like it's out of their scope of being able to act, what would you say to them?
Oh, they can act. They can act. Awareness is the first piece. Secondly, talking to their congressman is the other piece of that. Where do they stand? Because a grassroots level, not only discussion, but movement to say, I am concerned about this, is going to resound in Congress.
So you would encourage viewers to ask questions, learn more, become aware, pay attention to this podcast, and then reach out to their congressman and really...
Absolutely, absolutely.
And then with that support, what are the priorities that you would hope to see, or the directives you would hope to see come down?
I personally would like to see directives that focus more on strategic planning. I would like to see policy related to establishing metrics so we understand the impact and can assess climate change in terms of how it is impacting training and the logistics tail and other factors that will go into decision-making for now and into the future. But you have to have those metrics.
And is that something that the roles that you have had in your career completely encompass, or is there some level of collaboration that's required to really be able to come up with those metrics?
I think that the department would do well to get information from scientific communities, and they have the research communities, in order to formulate it. But the department is very good at establishing metrics. They have many, many metrics for many different things to say. Am I where I need to be? And they can do that. They're well equipped to do that.
How have you noticed the factoring in of uncertainty into these metrics and just being able to adjust to new information and potential, not just the impacts, but again, the ripple effects that you mentioned in the beginning, those chain effects? How is that all factored into the metrics? I feel like that could be quite a challenge.
In terms of when you're looking at uncertainty, you'd rather have things certain, of course. The military is very good at dealing with uncertainty, but they weigh it. They're looking at it from the perspective, what chance? They do this, often enough. They're always dealing with uncertainty of the enemy. So, it plays into the same type of decision-making and thought process you would go through with this, indeed. So I think they're equipped to do it. I think the more certain you are, the better the outcome. So when you're looking at climate change factors, having a shorter time period that you're looking at it in terms of impact rather than looking at 100 years and you have a large amount of uncertainty is actually better.
So Joan, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your thoughts with us. If there's anything you'd like to leave the viewers with in terms of really, what is it that you would love to, the one line that I always ask guests to sort of make that impression and incite that passion that you so well come across with.
Thank you, and it was a pleasure being here as well. So I think that one closing remark that I would like to make is that readiness is so important to the national security, to the peace in our nation. And in order to ensure that we can achieve that readiness, the training piece for our soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines is critical to that. And the resiliency that is, for our land and our resources and access to our ranges and training areas.
Thank you, Joan. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. I mean, it's very palpable that this is something you really believe strongly in, and I know our viewers will take that away. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Climate and Security Podcast. We'd love to hear from you. Please tweet me directly at SWETAC or the Center for Climate and Security's Twitter handle. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, write a review on iTunes, share widely, and finally, consider donating to the podcast from the Center of Climate and Security's podcast page, www.climateendsecurity.org/podcast, by clicking on Make a Donation. We will continue the series of conversations with the most prolific and dedicated folks in this space, and your support is greatly appreciated. Thank you, and please tune in again for the next episode of the Climate and Security Podcast.